query that's related to your case, just let me know. So firstly, just to introduce myself really quickly, I'm Dr. Ryan Eller. Obviously work down at Cal State Monterey Bay as the student services coordinator for this program. I am also a lecturer in our computer science department. So I teach a wide range of classes in our undergraduate computer science program. Was actually going to teach in MIST roughly about 5 or 6 years ago, but I felt like being an academic advisor for a program and a teacher in the same program could have been maybe a little too much of the students seeing me all the time. So I decided to turn down actually teaching in this program. But professionally before this, I did do the MIST program as a student a very long time ago, and then worked as an instructional designer in Palo Alto, San Jose, San Mateo region for quite some time. And then actually came back and worked for a school district in an ed tech role down in the Salinas area where I currently live, and then came back to work at CSUMB about 5 or 6 years ago now. So I've been putting a lot of this practice into my teaching role, but it's a great program. And so hopefully as I go through, I can answer some questions about how it might benefit the two of you. So let me go ahead and move forward here. So first, an overview of MIST. Our program, like a lot of instructional design programs, there's many out there, it has its own kind of uniqueness to it. I think every instructional design program that I've come across has something that's really unique about it. And in our case, I think it starts with the faculty. Much like you two, there's a very diverse group. We have folks who have K through 12 experience. We have folks whose entire professional career has been in instructional design or corporate training. And then there's another group of our faculty that are very much so well-versed in higher ed, instructional design, or ed tech constructs and contexts for that matter. So for example, one of our faculty members in our program is one of the folks who works at the academic technology specialist group on campus. In fact, everybody in our academic technology group has gone through our program on some level. So that gives us folks who are very well versed in kind of up-to-date, very new technology in the ed tech field. But then you also have some great theoretical underpinnings from those who worked in higher ed or worked in K through 12 sectors or in corporate training for that matter for decades. So we have a very, very diverse, but very strong faculty that has that great context knowledge in multiple disciplines. For our particular program, unlike other programs, in my opinion, we are very heavily focused on tangible outcomes and usage of instructional technology. There is some theory that's in our program, but not much. This is much so more focused on using this technology in one of two settings, either corporate settings or educational settings. And that kind of has morphed over time for our program, because the reality is there's about 3 different subsets of students. There are folks who are K through 12 oriented folks. That makes up roughly about 1/3 of our students. Then there's probably another 1/3 that make up corporate trainers or corporate instructional designers, or even folks who work in government settings, as that's kind of a growing field. And then there's another 1/3 that work in a variety of subsets of higher education, some who are, folks in the classroom, and then there's other folks that are more academic technology specialists, ed tech specialists, folks that would be really using this type of technology. So it's a very diverse student group that does go along with that diverse faculty group. And then, of course, I think the benefit of a program like this, and especially we saw this, I think, unfortunately, with the pandemic the past few years now, is really distance and traditional education are becoming somewhat morphed in a lot of different ways together. And in some ways, traditional education, even teaching in my own context this year, you have to rely on a lot more technology and make the stuff that you're not doing in the classroom still be very engaging, and sometimes take over stuff that you would normally do in the classroom you can't do because of social distancing guidelines, things of that nature. So I think there's an ever increasing importance in education technology, and that's why I think a program like this that focuses so heavily on those tangible outcomes is really beneficial to the students who go through this program. So that gives you a general overview of kind of the key constructs of our program. And then when we think about it from an instructional design standpoint, if you're familiar with the ADDIE model, that's a key kind of focus of our program. And what that means really is that a graduate of our program would be able to take an instructional problem and plan a solution for it, design it, usually using some form of e-learning software. In most cases, this would be Adobe Captivate, but it really depends on kind of your particular context that you're teaching or instructing in or training in, then developing a solution, implementing it, and actually evaluating it and seeing if it works. That's another thing I really love about our program, is that we will teach quite a few different evaluation methods so that you can actually see, hey, is what I'm doing here actually working for the students who are using the things that I'm creating? Because it's really cool to be able to create nice new things, but if they're not working, then that's, you can always go back to the drawing board and make changes and things of that nature. Now, another great thing about our program is because there's a heavy focus on project management that you'll see kind of interwoven throughout the various classes, but there's also a true project management class in our program. This allows a lot of folks to look into more leadership-based roles. So I think those of you who are kind of already, it sounds like those of you are already starting to do a lot of this for your individual context. And so it gives you, I think, just a little bit more, maybe a little bit more formal education in that way. But we see folks take on these types of leadership roles, and anything from roles such as instructional technologists to corporate trainers, instructional designers. Really, it kind of, the world is your oyster after MIST, in my opinion. Okay, so what makes us a little bit more unique as well is that we are housed in the School of Computing and Design. A lot of instructional design programs are usually centered squarely in a K through 12 context, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, what I think is great about our program is because it's more broad, it does give you an opportunity to work with folks outside of your own individual context, and you get to learn a lot more from them, and take maybe what's working in a K through 12 context can sometimes be applicable to a higher ed context, or what's being done in corporate training can sometimes be, once again, moved to a different context. So we try to make the teams very diverse in terms of the skill sets and the backgrounds that you would be working with. And I think that makes it just, you get more out of it, in my opinion. It rounds you out, kind of broadens your tool belt a little bit. The other benefit to this is because it's in the School of Computing and Design, it goes back into some of the technology solutions. So not only will you have great access to a variety of different education technologies that we teach in the program, but you also have access to students, even in the undergraduate communication design or computer science programs, that sometimes will want to partner up with you and they'll be able to do kind of some high level coding that you don't necessarily want to do or are able to do. You'll be able to kind of rely on them to make your project even better. So for example, you'll work on a capstone by the end of the program. And we've had students who wanted to create learning games, and they don't really have the ability to actually code and create the games, but they'll work with undergraduate students to write some of that code for them so that they can focus on the actual educational outcome of the game. And then some of the students can partner up with them to help them make kind of the functionality work, if that makes some sense. So it broadens your ability to make some of your solutions a little bit more high tech if you want them to be. And then the other great thing about our program, on maybe a more kind of foundational level, is that we are a program that works with both full-time working professionals. In fact, I think those who have a context through which to put the curriculum through enjoy this experience a lot more than traditional students, even though we will allow, we do certainly allow more traditional full-time students to go through our program. I think for both of you, you benefit a lot more from this program being employed in a place that you can take what you're doing and apply the curriculum that you're learning to your work environment, and vice versa. Take your work environment and that can inform your projects for school. So I tend to find that those who are already employed get so much more out of this program because of that particular factor. Okay, so in terms of some of the program tracks at a glance, both of you are localish enough that you may be eyeing the blended program, but we do have an online program as well. They're pretty much identical. Both programs would start theoretically next fall, August 2022, and end December 2023. There are some early start options, but I generally just tell students if that's something of interest to you, you can just shoot me an email and I can explain what those are. So with that said, the mode of study, really the only thing that differentiates the two programs between the blended and the online is primarily the way that the classes are delivered. So the blended program follows a more semester style where you do 16-week-long classes. You'd probably take anywhere from 2 to 4 classes at a time, which might sound a lot for a graduate program, but I'll explain how that works. It's not as crazy as that might sound. And then the online program plays out a little bit more like a quarter system. So the semester is just basically cut in half, and you would take 1 to 2 class for 8 weeks at a time. For the blended program, there are synchronous sessions at the beginning and end of each semester, whereas the online program naturally is completely online. And then those particular synchronous sessions would take place in person, or not in person, excuse me, online, whereas the synchronous sessions for the blended program would take place on campus at CSUMB. For both programs, it's a combination of 4-unit core courses and 2-unit support or elective courses, and I'll go over what that looks like in a second. And then for both programs as well, there's a capstone course that is one of two methodologies. There's either a research capstone where you would sit down and write kind of a traditional master's thesis if you're somebody who sees yourself going on for a PhD or EDD or something of that nature. That's the relatively more rare capstone. We'll have maybe 1 or 2 of those per cohort, but the more common one is the project-based capstone, where you create a very high level hour of instruction through some form of methodology. So most folks will do that using either Adobe Captivate or Articulate Storyline, mAuthor, some form of e-learning software. But others, as I noted before, will create games. Some folks will create very interactive web-based trainings, and others will just focus on something that's integrated into their particular LMS that they're using either at their school or their place of business. So it really just depends on the student. For either program, it's a 36-unit program. Tuition is roughly the same. The online program costs a little bit more because essentially the CSU assumes you won't travel, so they charge you more tuition. It's kind of I suppose, a little unfair, but that's the way that they break it down. For the blended program, it's $16K for the total tuition, but it's assuming also a little bit of travel costs to campus. And then naturally the starting date is identical and the application deadline is also identical with a May 31st application deadline. Okay, so I'll go through the curriculum. I'll explain the classes in the fully online program because they're identical. I won't explain them again in the blended program, but you'll see the differentiation between the two programs a bit further by going through it this way. So in the online program, for the first 8 weeks, students would take instructional technology, which is essentially a survey class of various forms of education and instructional technology that are common in our field, and also some of the professional organizations. Just a good way to build a foundation of kind of what's happening in the field of instructional technology. That's partnered with a tech workshop class, and that's to bring everybody up to speed. Because in our program, we expect folks, we actually don't have a particular major that we expect as a prerequisite. We don't even expect many technological skills in our program. This is more of a program that I hate to put it this way, but we kind of judge you more on your interest of the field than necessarily the skill sets that you have going into it, because we expect most people to kind of have a loose idea of what instructional design is, and then we can help kind of fill in the gaps. So the tech workshop class, it's focused very much so on some basic web scripting, LMS design. So in our case, we would give you access to Canvas just because that's the LMS that we use at CSUMB. In fact, most colleges use Canvas at this point. We can allow you to use Moodle. That's what we used to use, but at this point, I think most colleges are phasing into Canvas in some form or fashion. So that's why we're focusing on that particular LMS. We also teach just basic things like file transfer protocol clients so that you can take stuff from your computer and put them onto a website, things of that nature. Just a variety of things, some basic audio and visual tools and software that you can use to enhance learning modules, just some real basic stuff. So each week is kind of an individual workshop on a piece of technology that you would find yourself using throughout the program very frequently. And that way, when you get into classes that are a little bit more tech heavy, it's not going to be so daunting. You'll have the foundational skills to take on some new things that you're learning without having to be worried about picking up some of the skill sets that maybe some of your peers have, or maybe some of your peers are lacking. It just really depends. So everybody comes out kind of with that same level of skill sets that you would need to be successful in the program. In the second 8 weeks of the first semester would be instructional design, which is a little more theory-based, but this is really where you start to learn the storyboarding process of instructional design. So you get to see kind of, okay, how do I really plan out an effective learning module? Because everybody who goes into this field, or kind of the adjacent field of education that's related to instructional design or corporate training, we can get really excited about, hey, we see a gap, we're going to solve this gap by doing this. And a lot of times, especially folks who come to this program, you get so excited by the technology that they're kind of missing what the actual problem is that they're trying to solve. And so this class really helps you to identify, okay, these are my learners. This is a learner analysis that I would do to actually know enough about my learners to create a suitable solution, and then start to plan out what was that solution actually look like. Because many times we get so focused on the exciting technology that even a more simple solution can be actually the better solution. So that's why that's so focused on that in that instructional design class, is really identifying what is the problem, how can we solve it? And so that's the primary focus of that class. This is also where you would identify a capstone idea, and you would be assigned a capstone advisor. So throughout the entirety of the program, really all 16 months of it, you'll have the ability to work on this capstone in chunks so that it's not so daunting in the final two, really the final semester or the final 2 terms in the online program. There's also a writing workshop class, very basically focused on APA skills, other graduate research skills. So that way, when you're writing some of the papers in the program, which admittedly there's not a ton of them, but for those that there are, we just want to make sure that you have the APA skills that are relevant to our field. In the second semester in the spring, this is where it gets very hands-on very, very quickly. So firstly, there is another theory class, which is a learning theory class. And the primary focus of this class is to pick one of the various theories that we would teach you more about and use that as the underpinning to your capstone. So everything from adult learning theory, behaviorism, so on and so forth. There's tons of different theories that you'll learn in this class. You'll end up picking 1 or 2, or maybe potentially a few more, but usually 1 or 2, and kind of focusing in those into your capstone, so that you can say not only this is what the technical solution is, but this is how the technical solution fits into a broader form of learning theory that actually kind of makes sense to why I'm building my capstone the way that I am. Paired with that is a 2-unit elective class, the audio and video production class. This one, you're really focusing on learning how to use software like Camtasia, TechSmith, kind of simpler software in my opinion, but really good software in terms of what you get out of it. I use it every day when I create YouTube lectures for my classes. I create a ton of stuff in Camtasia. And so it's really good audio video production software. It can be a little tricky to learn on your own. So we do a heavy 8-week emphasis on that software. It's becoming very popular, I found, in the field of instructional design, because it's not too resource heavy on a computer, but it's very good at what it creates in terms of output. Then in term 4, or basically the back half of the spring semester, there's interactive multimedia. And this is where you're going to be learning an e-learning software in depth. So either Adobe Captivate, which is probably the single most popular form of e-learning software in the world, or Articulate Storyline. I'm finding that K through 12 professionals are enjoying Articulate Storyline quite a bit. It's a little less intense for the end user. It works a little bit better for younger audiences, essentially. But both do essentially the same thing, and they allow you to create web-based learning or scenario-based learning, even game-based learning, really depends on what you want to do. But they can be anything from a very souped-up PowerPoint to a very highly structured web-based module. So if you've ever done any online training, probably created in Adobe Captivate 9 times out of 10. We also do allow students to use MAuthor, which is a European e-learning software. It's interesting in that it's pretty good for what it is, because it's basically a web-based solution. But I think it's growing a little bit in popularity because it's so simple to use. Now, in terms of the summer, the first class would be assessment and evaluation. So very simple class looking at formative and summative evaluations. So basically formative evaluation, kind of the pre-planning of design of a module. And then in the second half of the summer, or second half of that class, I should say, you'd be looking at summative evaluations, which is essentially making sure that after beta testing has taken place, you've tested modules that you've created in the spring for your capstone in IST 526 interactive multimedia. You would put them through a beta testing phase during the summer. And then after doing that beta testing and getting some data from some of your end users, you do a summative evaluation and go, okay, is this actually working, or are there some substantive changes that I should make so that the modules that I'm creating are as successful as they can be. Then in the second part of the summer, there's advanced instructional design. And that's a class where you get to work with a real world client. So we've had clients that range from the National Library of Congress to, oh gosh, Fortune 500 companies in the Bay Area, the Department of Defense, other universities. Essentially, these folks will find some type of training issue that they're having in their current context, and they'll have you and your team that you're on work on a 10-week solution to an instructional need that they have. And so in most cases, this is about 30 minutes of training that they need help with. But it's awesome because you get to take everything that you've learned in the previous terms and now put them to use with somebody who is either a director of training or an instructional designer at an organization, and they can really sit down and look at this, the skills that you have and provide some feedback on areas that you can improve or things that you're doing really, really well. Most students find this to be their favorite class in the program because they finally get to see their skills in action, have somebody really assess them. From there is an additional elective. This is the Multimedia 2 class, which is a web scripting class, JavaScript and HTML5. So basically creating web-based learning solutions on the internet, being able to take modules that you're creating in IST 526 and putting them up on the internet, or creating interactive websites that kind of in conjunction with those modules fit together. So it's just a good skill set to have nowadays, just in case you don't have an LMS. Creating a web-based solution, you need a website, or in some cases, some LMSs fit into websites very well, and you can do that as well. So it just depends on your individual context once again. And then lastly, the capstone class runs for that final semester, and that's where you're doing either that project-based capstone or the research-based capstone. So that's our curriculum kind of in a nutshell. The only difference you'll see in the blended track is that there are a few additional options for electives. You could theoretically take them in the online program. It doesn't really matter, we can get you in. But the classes that I haven't discussed would be in the blended program. We offer a research methods class for those who would be writing a thesis. And that would just go over a variety of qualitative and quantitative methods, Qualtrics, survey design, things like that, nothing too crazy. And then in the final semester, there is a project management class for the blended program. It isn't a requirement because it's an elective, but it's kind of growing in popularity. I think it's one of those unique things because you can take a lot of different project management classes or even certification programs, but there's very few that you could actually do within an instructional design or training setting. And so that's why I really, really like this class. And I think that's why it's growing in popularity. It's just kind of a unique elective, really highly focused to our program. So once again, the only real key difference here would just be the number of classes. In the first semester for the blended program, you would be taking, in most cases, 4 classes, but the first 2 classes, or excuse me, the 2 support classes, the writing workshop and tech workshop class, we break them up into 8 weeks so that you're not taking 4 at one time. You'd only be taking 3 at one time. And the workload for those classes, they're meant to support the 2 core classes. So you're not getting overwhelmed. In fact, in a lot of cases, you're double dipping. Both class kind of has the same assignment, or they have something in one class's assignment that's very, very relevant to the other class's assignment. In the spring, you'd be taking, in most cases, 3 classes: learning theory, interactive multimedia, and then either audio and video production if you're a project-based capstone, or research methods if you're a research-based capstone. In the summer, for both programs, most folks are just taking 2 classes. And then in the final semester, you'd be taking your capstone with an elective combination, either the web-based scripting class or the project management class. So that's the curriculum for our program. And just in short, the key curricular outcomes the first semester, it's just developing a common understanding of the field and familiarity with instructional design processes. And it should also say instructional design technologies as well. In the spring, there's really a focus on learning theories and instructional design principles in the learning theories class. And then you're constructing functioning learning units and functioning learning modules, I should also say, in the interactive multimedia class. So each week you're learning some different type of functionality of either Adobe Captivate or Articulate Storyline so that you can pick up all of the skill sets. If you've ever touched either of those technologies, they're awesome because they do so many different things, but they can be a big pain in the butt too, because they're not always very user-friendly. So the focus of those classes to really get you to a high-level user of either one of those softwares so that you can really start to do some really cool things with them. In the summer, that's where we once again focus on the developing and conducting appropriate usability, reliability, or efficiency tests of the learning modules just to see that they're being successful in what you intend them to do. And then in the final semester, that's that focus on the capstone project or thesis that connects with your career as a culminating experience. And then of course, in every semester, You're using a variety of interactive multimedia software, a variety of infotech and media through both individual and team-based projects that you'd be doing in any of the set classes. Okay, so that's kind of the curriculum of the program as a whole. Move this forward. For our program, it's a little bit more unique in how we operate our week to week. I don't know how this worked out this way, but we run our week essentially with Wednesday being the first day of the week, and it goes through to the following Tuesday. So Wednesday, kind of as soon as the day hits, that's when the new module will open. And what we recommend for students is to really look at the new module, understand what's kind of being asked of you for that week, and start to do some reading. I don't think our program is very heavy with reading, but it, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4, maybe even 5 hours of reading a week. So I do recommend students to try to get their reading done as early as possible. That's what I would do when I was in the program. Then on Thursdays, I generally recommend folks to finish any reading that they have, or at least get the majority of it done, and then start any of the discussions that are based in our class. Because the program has you, really both programs are online in a lot of ways. Even the blended program, probably 90% of the work you're doing is online. So there is a lot of discussion-based learning to keep that connection going with both your peers and the faculty. So I really recommend for folks to try to get their initial post on the discussion forums up as soon as possible so that you have a chance for your peers to really review what you're saying and have conversations with one another. It's the best way to learn in those circumstances. So then on Friday, I generally recommend, if you haven't done so already, to start your assignments, finish any reading that you might have not already done so by Thursday, and then ask questions of your faculty. Our faculty is very engaging. They're great folks and very kind folks. But I generally recommend students to just ask their questions as soon as possible. And that way you're really not trying to hunt and peck by Monday and Tuesday when things are picking up a little bit. Saturday was my big work day. I would usually put together anywhere from 6 to 8 hours of work on these days, where I do the majority of my assignments and any activities that were required of the program. Sunday, I would try to take the entire day off for myself, and then Monday and Tuesday, I would finalize any assignments that I hadn't done so already, finish any discussions that hadn't been wrapped up, and then submit assignments and prepare for the following week. Okay, so we really do try to keep everything self-contained to 1 week. There are some projects that might carry over for a few weeks, but you'll have a deliverable in most cases from some piece or portion of that assignment, so that you're getting something in each and every week and getting lots of constant feedback on everything that you're doing. Okay. So another common question that I get about our program is kind of, what do I do with this degree after I earn it? You're putting in a lot of time and effort to earn this thing. You probably want to know what you can use it for. And so once again, it goes back to something that I've already discussed, but really it's a program that nowadays, because of the growth of this field, it gives you a lot of options. And so the primary fields would be something in ed tech, instructional design, training, or human performance technology fields. But after running a survey of our recent grads from the last 2 years, these were the most common jobs that our graduates had. The vast majority became instructional designers. Another good chunk of them became corporate trainers. Another good chunk also became learning experience managers, which I have found looking at their job descriptions were basically corporate trainers, just a different way of saying it. And then for those in the K through 12 sectors, they either went on to be director of STEM or ed tech within their districts, or they would take on, in some cases, ed specialist type roles. Every district kind of had their own unique ways of calling them basically the same thing, but you would find those types of roles as well. And then there's a lot of folks who will take what they're learning and just apply it to what they're already doing. So I found that a lot of the folks who are teachers, they love teaching and they just want to continue to teach. So they just want to pick up the skill sets and use that in their current context, which is absolutely fine too. And I've seen a really wide mixture of where folks have gone. I've seen a lot of folks who are in K through 12 environments go out into corporate training and being corporate instructional designers. I've seen folks in the corporate world transition over to higher ed, and I've seen folks in higher ed transition to other roles in higher ed or outside of higher ed. So it's been a really interesting, since I've been around the program now for 6 years in this role and 2 years as a student, been able to see a lot of movement from our graduates into a variety of different ways. So I think a lot of folks go into it thinking one thing, and a lot of times by the time they finish the program, they find some niche in here that they love so much they have to pursue that as a career. And so that just ends up happening more often than not. Okay. So in terms of some of the admissions details, Obviously, probably the most important date would be the May 31st final deadline. We do have a priority deadline coming up December 15th. And generally what I recommend for students on that is, I know in a lot of cases, getting all the application requirements before December 15th can be a little taxing. But if they submit the online application minus all of the required documents, kind of by university rules, we have to consider you a priority applicant. So you can fill out the online application, submit it, and then either send me the documents or send me any missing documents after you complete the application. And those required documents include a copy of your unofficial college transcripts, and then a copy of your official college transcript should come to the university directly. You don't need to give me a copy of your official ones. I'll take your unofficials. A statement of purpose detailing really why you want to be in the program. So I recommend students write somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 2,000 words, and just tell me your interest in the program. As I said before, we don't expect people to necessarily be, professional level instructional designers day one in this program. That is not the intended group that we target for this program. So really, for me, it's knowing, what do you like about our program, what you see yourself using it for, how you can benefit from it. Those three questions are really the types of things that I like to see in a statement of purpose. And I know the faculty who help me review your applications would agree with that. There is a letter of recommendation requirement. You can either attach those as documents. We also have a letter of recommendation Google form if your recommenders would prefer to score you in a more quantitative way. We basically have a 1 to 5 scale. They can jump through and rate you 1 to 5 on a variety of items, and then it gives them some space to write about you. So either option works, doesn't really matter to us, just so long as we have a feel of kind of, either your professional or academic background from your recommenders. It really doesn't matter who recommends you. Just those two types of contexts would be what we prefer most. The other question we get a lot with the letters of recommendation is kind of, who can they be? If they're a colleague from your work, I would prefer that they either be somebody that you work directly with or a supervisor, not somebody that you kind of knew a long time ago. If that's the best you can find, I totally get it. Sometimes it's difficult nowadays, especially with COVID, but when in doubt, if it's somebody you're currently working with, I don't mind. They don't have to necessarily be a supervisor. Sometimes your colleagues can give me really good information that's really beneficial for us when we're reviewing your application. Or past professors could make sense as well. It just depends on what you're trying to show us with those letters of recommendation. For you two, it won't be applicable, but for a few folks that I know that I'm recording this for, this will be applicable. If you're somebody who has documents from outside of the United States, you would need to prove some form of English proficiency, either through your school teaching primarily in English, using a TOEFL score or an IELTS score, or in some cases now they'll accept Duolingo test scores as well. So some test of English to prove English proficiency. And then lastly, if you have any documents from outside of the United States in terms of transcripts, those would need to go through a foreign credit evaluation through a NACES partner institution. So these include things like World Education Service or other document kind of a translation / evaluation services. So those are what's required of our application. I think it's relatively a simple application. The Cal State Apply portion of it's very, very easy. Just collecting the documents and putting together a strong statement of purpose is generally what takes students the most amount of time. So at this point, I think that's all that I have. Any questions from the two of you that I can answer?
Hey, can you hear me, Ryan?
Yes, I can, Randall.
Cool. So I actually, you can call me Randy. Sorry, I just always start with, I don't know why I always start with Randall. And I forgot who else we have with us.
Lauren. Yeah.
Is it Lauren? Okay.
Lauren, yeah.
Hey, Lauren.
Hi.
Sorry, I can't see you anymore because the slide shows up. Anyway, so I guess a couple of questions off the bat, and by the way, great presentation. Very clear and easy to understand. So as a couple of different things, as you know, coming in as a classroom teacher, 20 plus years, there's some level of intimidation with the tech piece, ironically, but not so much. But I mean, I get really excited to hear about like what's behind all these applications and platforms that I'm constantly training people to use.
Yeah, no, totally.
Uh, but I'm very intimidated by a lot of what you just said. I mean, I had never even considered the concept of instructional design. You know what I mean? Like I had never even like, I'm sure it's something that's quite familiar to me, but I'd never really considered it as like the set. So these are the kinds of things that like, wait a minute, am I really ready for this? But in terms of the capstone project and, if basing it around an LMS and you guys sort of push Canvas because higher ed tends to use that. Do you ever find that K through 12 folks use their own particular LMS?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And
Okay.
that's a really good clarifying question. So just for the sake of those who will watch us on recording, I think they'll really like to hear this. So for folks who are working on their capstones, even though we use Canvas as kind of the backdrop for what we're teaching from LMS design, by no means is that what we would expect a student to use in necessarily any of their assignments. In most cases, they're going to use LMSs that are very much so related to where they work. So for example, we have a lot of folks that will come to our program from the Defense Language Institute down in Monterey, and they have their own LMS called Sakai. It's very different from Canvas, completely different. I couldn't even know where to start with it. In that case, they're going to do a capstone completely based on something that's relevant in a Sakai LMS system. And so in that case, we would usually have you partner with a professor that understands those LMS contexts.
Okay.
So
That's
there will,
cool.
yeah, plenty will know your guys' context, so no worries on that front.
Oh, that's really exciting. Okay, cool. Because that's what I'm in my wheelhouse. Like that's like, I really enjoy that component because like I came in almost sort of like, into ed tech, sort of almost like a Luddite, where I was like kind of a doubter, 10 years ago. And then
Sure.
I was like, oh my God, this is a game changer on all levels. And I ended up being the person that like literally led and facilitated, the adoption, the integration. And so like that gets me really excited is to learn what's behind that. So I just want to make sure that like it's not like, okay, you've got to learn Canvas and Canvas only or whatever it is. And then what was my other question? Sorry, I'll actually let Lauren jump in. Sorry, or
Oh, yeah,
unless
no worries.
we'll try to articulate better.
Yeah, I had a question about the course format. I loved the breakdown of each week. Is there any sort of like live online format of class where you're like listening to someone lecture, or is it a lot of like self-paced through the learning module?
That is a really good question. So it's both. What you will find is most professors will have a weekly live session. And it's optional because both programs are one program is hybrid and the other is online. And by law, we can't require you to necessarily, just by the way the CSU does it, we can't require you to go to those. Otherwise, they don't fit a hybrid or online methodology. But you get so much out of those sessions. So really, they're usually in the neighborhood of an hour to two. And they're just going to go over the same material in many cases that they've recorded already, or that you would be reading about, but in just greater detail. So that's kind of how we skirt the issue of it. Technically, we can't have you go there, but we highly recommend it. And if you can't go for whatever reason, something comes up in the week, that's recorded too. So those are great. And a lot of folks will get so much out of it, especially in the first two core classes in the instructional design and instructional technology class. Going to those sessions can really help inform your capstone so much in the early portions. And then the second semester with interactive multimedia, it's so big because Captivate can be, or Articulate, depending on what you're using, they can be just tough at times and they can throw you for a loop. And a lot of times it's a really simple solution, but you just don't know it until you've used it for a very, very long time. So the professors that help you with those technologies are totally cognizant of that fact. And so they're there, they can help you troubleshoot. You can pick up a lot of good on the fly skills for those two technologies really, really quickly. So yes, all of the classes do that. It's really up to the student to kind of take advantage of those if they want to.
And do you know, are they typically like in the evenings? Just, as someone who's probably would come into the program as a working professional, just kind of trying to figure out how it would fit into my work day.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Most of the time they would start at 7 p.m.
Okay, great.
And that's with the understanding that most of us, we end our day at 5 to 6 o'clock and we need some time to commute home.
Mhm.
So most of the time they'll start at 7 or maybe a touch earlier. But for example, I know one professor, she holds all of her office hours for every single course that she teaches from 7 to 9. And she
Okay,
does all of those live sessions from 7 to 9.
great.
So can I just clarify what Lauren asked then? Because
Yeah.
that was a good, great question. Is that so basically synchronous is not required. Obviously, it's extremely helpful.
Yes.
In those synchronous sections would happen, like you said, around 7. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct. And I'll ask a clarifying question of the two of you. Are you both looking at the hybrid program?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So in that circumstance, obviously, any of the time on campus is naturally required. You'd have to be there. Those have been online recently because of the pandemic. But starting hopefully spring of next year, we can start to bring people actually back on campus, because our building that we teach in also hosts a lot of education technology that's very hands-on. You can't use it unless you're here because it's integrated into the building. So it's one of those things where we really get a lot of you guys being here as well. So long story short, those synchronous sessions on campus are absolutely required live. And then anything that we do after that, most of the time isn't required, minus any presentations that you might do for the program. The very rare cases where there may be exam, there's only one class that utilizes an exam. So that's a very rare circumstance, but that would be another reason. And then the other synchronous sessions that aren't necessarily required but highly recommended, we will bring in industry professionals from K through 12 contexts, corporate setting especially up in the Bay Area, and then other folks from just various industries that are related to our own. And they'll give a lot of really great talks and sometimes use the technology with you guys live. It's really cool. Those would be ones that are just like, to me, if I was a student, it's such an added benefit to your studies. But once again, we can't require you to necessarily come to them, but we highly recommend them. So to answer your question a very long way, technically, no, you don't have to go to any of those. But I tell students you might as well just put them on the calendar and plan to, if you want to get the most out of your education.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like using a new software program, it's going to require a significant amount of synchronous.
Totally. Yeah, no, totally.
I mean, at least for me. And
I think most people feel the same way.
You just mentioned something I wanted to follow up on. You said, you said only one class utilizes an exam. Did I hear that correctly? So then then everything else is basically like sort of deliverable projects or what, or, kind of, is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Yeah, the vast majority are going to be two forms of deliverables, either a written paper or a functional project that you're creating.
Okay, cool. So, I mean, if your paper's not up to snuff, you're going to get it back and do it again.
Pretty much, yeah.
That takes the anxiety away. I like that, actually. Cool.
I had a question about, I think it was the advanced instructional design course where you partner with an organization to help develop some training. Do you have like a bank of partners that you typically work with, or are students kind of empowered to go out and seek their own opportunities there?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to use it to answer another question that's related to it. The first is, we do have kind of a bank of folks, because what you'll find is that you're going to have so much hands-on interaction with these folks. You end up creating a really great final deliverable. And for a lot of folks, it can be a great resume line item as well. Long story short, yes, we do have a lot of partners that are kind of mainstays, and that's the Department of Defense, number one. National Library of Congress has come back year after year after year. And then there's a couple of companies that I technically can't name them. So they're big companies, and yes, they come back each year. But this is a really good question on your front. Can you kind of either find your own folks, or in some cases even use your own place of employment? That can be a yes. What we only ask is that you connect somebody that you've either found or that you currently work for with the professor of the course. And so that way she can kind of detail to them like, hey, is this a big enough project for this class, or is this too big of a project for this class? And the reason I answer that question this way is because if it's too big for the class, then that sounds like a great capstone. And then that's something that either you could do as a capstone or another student could do as a capstone. And then they could break off a chunk of that and then put it into the class. So for example, we had a student work with the Monterey County office, the county of Monterey, their 911 dispatch center. They needed folks to create a training for their dispatchers on how to handle stress because they were having so much turnover in that department. They were losing these people that they'd spend thousands and thousands of dollars to train. It's a very training intensive position, as you can imagine. And so they created this basically stress reduction training that also gave them continuing education units to bump up their pay, right? So the county office, I went over and I met with them for the project. Sounded like a great project, but it was like hours and hours of instruction that they wanted. There was no way that could be that summer class, just too big. But they broke off a little chunk for that summer. And then that team that worked on that, they all enjoyed it so much that they did a team-based capstone to create the rest of what they wanted. So that can be the great thing about folks that either find these projects, or if we find new partners, it can double dip in that circumstance. So yes, if you find somebody, that is great. We would just ask that you connect it to Dr. Farrington, that course's professor.
Got it.
Any other questions you guys can think of?
I know GRE scores are optional. Do you weigh them heavily? I took the GRE it's like 8 years ago at some point. So scores have been erased and are irrelevant, and I don't want to take it again.
I never took it, so glad you asked.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I also took it without asking this question as a student, and I wish I would have asked this question when I was a student applying to MIST like a decade plus ago now.
Yeah.
No, don't take it. Really, any CSU should answer this question the same way that I'm answering it, regardless of program. We don't require it for almost any CSU program. You just need really the simplest thing to qualify for a CSU graduate program. Every one of them has the same standard, a 2.5 undergraduate GPA or above. Most people have a 2.5 GPA or above. So if you have that, do not take the GRE. We can only require it as a substitute for too low of a GPA.
Got it.
So go ahead. No, right.
I'm going to date myself here. So given that I went to UC Santa Cruz throughout the 90s and was on the narrative evaluation system.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no GPA.
That is
but I have a lot of very goods on there.
Don't worry about that's a really good question because just before because I also went to CSUMB for my undergrad, and I don't want to date myself either, but we also copied UCSC for a while there with
the narrative evaluation.
The narrative evaluations. And so don't you worry, our admissions staff is well versed with narrative evaluation.
What a good versus a very good is, yes.
Yeah, it all kind of can be adjusted to a GPA scale. So worries. Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. Cool.
I think I'm good. And did you say that just getting the straight application with no documentation by 12/15 would get you in for priority? Is that what you said?
That is correct. Yeah, we don't have to turn those priority folks over to the Office of Admissions till January 15th. So generally we recommend hey, submit your thing in 12/15. We'll kind of keep it on the down low between us that you haven't sent in the documents, and then evaluate you by 1/15, and then we'd send you over to admissions from there.
Cool.
So yeah, basically you'd have another month to collect the stuff after the 12/15 deadline.
Yeah. Great.
Cool.
Okay, and then I guess my last one, as a K-12 educator, with their foot in the pool of edutech, do you find a lot of candidates like myself? Is that fairly normal?
Very, very normal. Yeah. As I said before, I would say roughly a third, of the folks are like you. But for example, 2 cohorts ago, 50% of the cohort were like you. So it depends a little bit on each incoming class. but I would say no less than a quarter, but most of the time more near 50%, just because there's a lot of folks who are kind of going, I don't want to do a traditional MEd program. I want to do something a little bit more flashy. And so they'll look at a program like ours, and they'll just have that interest in ed tech, and this is just the right type of program for them. So yeah, no, you would not be out of place here by any stretch of the imagination.
Cool. Great. Well, that's been a great presentation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Lauren, anything left for you, or you feel good?
I feel great. Yeah, thank you so much for this. This was super helpful.
Absolutely, sounds good. Well, I'll let you guys go and have a great holiday season, and we'll talk soon.
You as
You as
well.
well.
Take
Nice
care.
meeting you both.
Nice to meet you.